So this is the second part of section 3.6. It is still solving inequalities. Solving inequalities using the quadratics, but it is still 3.6. It's just continued. So we did the graphing part yesterday, and we are going to do the algebraic part today. So we are solving this with algebra, which means that I expect that there is barely any graphing. Maybe you could graph this to check your answer, but it's really tough for some people to understand what it looks like when they're graphing these things anyway. So I just want you to understand how to solve these, how to look, how to be able to write your answers in the form of x is greater than or x is less than something, all right? Because your picture, when you graph it, is just a picture with one side shaded, but it's hard to put that into words or into numeric values. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to pick some random example. It doesn't matter what that example is because you all know how to solve this. We just need to be able to solve it and figure out how to put greater than or less than stuff in. So this would be something where I ask you to solve the inequality, and it's like x squared plus 4x minus 32 is greater than 0, all right? So this is an example, and it's asking you to solve it algebraically. So the thing that you have to do first is you have to kind of pretend that this is just a regular equal sign. So just pretend that this thing is a regular equal sign, and we're going to solve x squared plus 4x minus 32 equals 0. Now, this is an equation I would expect every single person to be able to come in here and solve immediately. I would expect you guys to be able to walk in here and give you that equation and solve it immediately. Now, something you have to think about is, can we factor it? Can we use the quadratic formula? Can we use the Brooklyn method? Should we complete the square? Which the answer to that is no. Should we solve using roots? How should we solve this? This is the stuff that we spent the entirety of chapter 3 talking about until this point. So this should be something that you look at and go, yeah, I know how to solve this really, really easily because it's just going to factor into two things and it's going to equal 0. It's going to be x plus 8 and x minus 4, right? Because negative 4 and positive 8 multiply together to give you negative 32. Positive 8 and negative 4 add together to give you 4. That's what I want. Now the question is, or the thing is, I've technically changed what this turned into when I went to here, right? I changed it into an equal sign. Now that's not right, because right now I'm going to say that my two answers should be x plus 8 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0, and then my answers would be x equals negative 8 and x equals positive 4. Now that's great. That tells you where the two values really start, but now I don't know, should I put in a greater than symbol here? Should I put in a greater than symbol here? Should I put a less than symbol or a less than symbol or a greater than and a less than or any combination of them? I don't know. So up to this point, everything has been the same. This next step is the step that things kind of change. So all I'm doing here is I'm going to put this on a number line, and I'm going to put my two values on my number line, negative 8 and positive 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to test points. I'm going to test points in my original inequality to see if they work or if they don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a point that is smaller than negative 8. So negative 9 is smaller than negative 8. I'm going to pick a point between negative 8 and 4. So 0 falls in between negative 8 and 4. And then I'm going to pick a point that's bigger than 4, which is 5. What I'm doing when I test these points is I'm seeing, do the numbers smaller than negative 8 work? Do the numbers in between negative 8 and 0, or negative 8 and 4 work? Do the numbers bigger than 4 work? Which numbers work? That's what I'm testing. Because if I'm testing this and I find out that my answer is negative 9 and that works, that's telling me all numbers smaller than negative 8 will work. If I test this point, this tells me all numbers between negative 8 and 4 will work. If I test this point, this tells me that 5 numbers bigger than 4 will work. So I'm just going to test these points in my original equation, and that will tell me whether or not these work or not. So when I plug in negative 9, I can plug them into whatever form of this I want, but it has to be with the greater than 0. Okay? So I'm going to test this number in this equation. So I'm going to do negative 9 squared plus 4 times negative 9 minus 32 is greater than 0. I want to see if that is a true statement or a false statement. Okay? So I'm going to get negative 9 squared is 81. 4 times negative 9 is negative 36. Minus 32 is greater than 0. 81 minus 36 is 45. 45 minus 32 is 13. 13 is greater than 0. That is a true statement, so that is telling me these numbers work. Okay, and I'll go through more of this in just a second. Okay, so I'll go through more of this in just a second. Right now, I'm just going to do check marks and X's to see if they're working. Now I'm going to test 0 in this same equation. Okay, so I'm going to do the same exact thing right now. I'm going to test 0. So I'm going to do 0 squared plus 4 times 0 minus 32 is greater than 0. So this will all simplify down to negative 32 is greater than 0, and that is not true, not true. And then I'm going to do my last one, which is 5. So I'm going to test 5 in this equation. So I'm going to do 5 squared plus 4 times 5 minus 32 is greater than 0. So I'm going to get 5 squared is 25 plus 20 is 45 minus 32 is greater than 0. So then I get 13 is greater than 0. So this also works. So what I have just determined with these 3 numbers, I've determined that all the numbers smaller than negative 8 work. I've determined that all of the numbers bigger than 4 work. And I've determined that no numbers in between negative 8 and positive 4 work. So if I put this on a graph, what this would look like on a graph is I would put an open circle on negative 8 because this is just a greater than symbol. It is not greater than or equal to. Remember, dotted and solid, since this is just greater than, it's going to be an open circle on each of these. Those are the 2 values that I found out. And since it's a greater than symbol, I just put an open circle. If it was greater than or equal to, I would fill it in. So then I'm going to shade my number line wherever my check mark direction is. Shade my number line wherever my check mark direction is. So this one right here is specifically telling me that X is less than negative 8. And this one right here is telling me specifically that 8X is greater than 4. So this is telling me that any number smaller than negative 8 or any number bigger than 4 will satisfy this equation. This is the answer that I'm looking for. Any number smaller than negative 8 or any number bigger than 4 will satisfy this equation. So if you pick negative 10, that would work. If you pick negative 50, that would work. If you picked 2, that would not work because 2 is not smaller than negative 8 and 2 is not bigger than 4. All right? Does anyone have any questions on what I'm talking about with this? So this step up to here is old news. All of this stuff with the number line is new stuff. This is what we're doing, and all you're doing is testing 3 points. One smaller than your critical value, one in between your 2 critical values, and one bigger than your critical value. So it's going to look like this on the number line every time. You pick the points to test. They just have to be smaller, in between, and bigger than. And then what you're going to do is test those points and fix your number line. All right? I'm going to give you another one that I want you to try on your own. All of these questions are the exact same. Absolutely nothing is going to change with these questions. I just want you to try it out. You are solving this the same exact way that you would have solved it before, whether that's using the quadratic formula, whether that's using graphing, whether that's using whatever. You have to find the values. Once you find the values, you test your points. So I'm going to give you one where you actually have to find some values that are a little bit trickier. So we'll see what we look at here. So let's say that we have 2x squared plus 3x is less than or equal to 2. So try this one out. I'm going to pause my recording, and then I'm going to be able to answer any questions that you guys have. Then we'll come back to it and make sure that you know what you're doing. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to move this 2 over to the other side. So I'm going to move the 2 over to the other side. So I get 2x squared plus 3x minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. Now, a couple things to think about here. Number one, I like the Brooklyn method. I like the Brooklyn method. You guys might not. Right here, if you want to, you can absolutely use the quadratic formula, but I don't like that. So I'm going to move this over to the other side, or multiply that times that. So I'm going to get x squared plus 3x minus 4 equals 0. I'm solving it like it's not an inequality. I'm solving it like it's an equation. So now I know I can factor this into x plus 4 and x minus 1 equals 0. Now, the big thing with the Brooklyn method, remember, you have to divide by what you originally multiplied by and then simplify. So this is going to be x plus 2. And then remember, if I'm solving, I can solve from here. If I'm factoring, I have to move. But I'm going to solve from here. So it's just going to look like this. And then I'm going to get x plus 2 equals 0 and x minus 1/2 equals 0. So my two answers are going to be x equals -2 and x equals +1/2. That is the old news stuff. You should have been able to get to x equals -2 and x equals +1/2 by yourself. You should have been able to do that, period. All right? So that being said, I'm now going to put those numbers on a number line. I don't care what these numbers are at all. It doesn't matter what these are. I care about the numbers that I'm testing. So I know I have to test the point -2 and +1/2. And now I know that this is a greater than or less than or equal to sign, so I can already put my dots on here if I want. I can put filled in dots right here. I don't have to do anything with the testing to know that that's going to be a filled in dot. All right. So now I'm going to test my 3 points. My 3 points, I'm going to pick one smaller than -2, so -3. I'm going to pick one between -2 and +1/2, which 0 would work, and then bigger than 1/2, so 1 would work. So those 3 points that I'm going to test, I can test it wherever I want. So I'll test it right here, I guess. It doesn't matter which one you test. It just has to be an inequality. So 2 times -3 squared plus 3 times -3 minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. So -3 squared is 9 times 2 is 18. 3 times -3 is -9. Minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. So that is 7 is less than or equal to 0, which is not true. Okay, so then we try 0. So this is step number 1 for testing. Step number 2 for testing goes here. So I'm going to do 2 times 0 squared plus 3 times 0 minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. So 0 plus 0 minus 2 means -2 is less than or equal to 0, which is true. Okay, and then the last one, which looks like this, is 1 is the point. So 2 times 1 squared plus 3 times 1 minus 2 is less than or equal to 0. 1 squared is 1 times 2 is 2 plus 3 is 5 minus 2 is less than 0. So 3 is less than or equal to 0, which is not true. So it looks like this. So your number line should be going this way, and it should stop at that point. Okay? So the way that you write this, and a lot of people struggle with writing these, but your number has to be bigger than -2 and smaller than 1/2 technically, right? So it has to be bigger than -2 and smaller than 1/2. So there's 2 ways to write this, and I'm going to do them in blue. So my answers could look like this. I could have x is greater than or equal to -2 and x is less than or equal to 1/2. That is one way I could write my answer. Because this is saying x has to be bigger than -2, but also it has to be smaller than 1/2. It has to be between those two numbers. The other way that you can write this is using this inequality. You can say -2 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 1/2. If you notice what this is saying x is bigger than -2, which is exactly what this says, and x is less than 1/2, which is exactly what this says. This way of looking at it means that x is between -2 and +1/2. This is the way that the book will write it. This is the way that the SAT will write it. This is the way that I will write it. This is an acceptable answer. You can put that as an answer for a quiz, and I would give you credit for it. The one in the box, is the answer that you are going to get everywhere else. This is saying x is between -2 and +1/2. All right? Any questions you guys can think of right now?
I have a question that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I swear I remember a thing with inequalities. If it's like a greater than equation, it's always going to be like the or thing. So like the first problem where we wrote like x is less than -8 or x is greater than 4, and then less than problems like this one is always going to be like the and problem like that. So like I was able to write the final thing before checking all of the work, and it worked
Yes,
out.
and that's totally fine. If you want to do it that way, that is 100% fine. The only thing is just make sure that you're paying attention to whether you have to divide by negatives or things like that, because that could flip the inequality sign. So just make sure that you're paying attention to the rules of the inequality. So that's important. And then the only reason I do this way is because this way works for absolutely every single scenario, and it's foolproof. And I think that if we had to go back to Algebra 1, it would take too long to describe and discuss what's going on, because I agree, you're absolutely right, and that's a great form, and that's what you should be doing if you remember. But I just don't think very many people are going to remember that. You know what I mean? But it is totally, totally fine for you to do that if you want to do it that way.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any other questions or issues or concerns that they'd like to bring up? All right, so I'll stop my recording.